Hi everyone, William here with the Grand Duke Dmitri video series, and today we're not doing either a diary entry or a letter section. We're back to 1939 with the interview in Candide, the interview of Dmitri in Candide from December 28th, 1938. That was the publication date. So, our recap, the previous video, we were in 1915, and Dmitri was very excited about going to Moscow the next day, and he didn't seem too upset with the fact that he was being ghosted by the ballerina Alexandra Balshova. Even though he had earlier called her the woman I want, she hadn't responded to his letter, and so I'm sure he was disappointed, but he didn't seem upset. So in 1939, the journalist Jean Fayard from Candide comes and sits down with Dmitri in the restaurant at the Georges V Hotel, which was where Dmitri lived in Paris when he was in Paris. And the interview had been requested by Dmitri himself to talk about this scandal of the Nazis having offered young Prince Vladimir Kirillich the throne of Ukraine, and Dmitri says that anybody who would, who would consider something like that was being basically nonsensical. Okay, our cast today is certainly a glittering one, though none of the people mentioned are actually present. We have Nicholas II, Alexander II, Kirill, who of course in this article is referred to as Cyril, Andrei, Boris, their sister Helen, and Vladimir, of course, and Maria gets a mention as well, Dmitri's sister. So, unlike the readers of Candide, many of you already know the things that Fayard feels like he needs to explain to his readers about the imperial family, but don't worry, there's also some very interesting comments on the imperial family made by Fayard, and this section is, the background information that he feels his readers need. So, here we go. Grand Dukes are the sons and grandsons of Tsars. Nicholas II's branch of the family was completely extinguished in the well-known Yekaterinburg tragedy. The legitimate inheritance then reverted to the branch whose eldest son was Grand Duke Cyril, recently deceased, and like his cousin Nicholas, a grandson of Alexander II. Grand Duke Cyril had two brothers, Grand Duke Andrei and Grand Duke Boris, who lived in Bellevue, near Paris, and a sister, Grand Duchess Helen. The emigration was not united in recognizing Cyril because he was criticized for having shown certain liberal tendencies at the beginning of the revolution. Upon his death, there was complete accord in acknowledging his son, Grand Duke Vladimir, aged 21. It was he to whom the crown of Ukraine was offered. Grand Duke Dmitri and his sister, Grand Duchess Maria, belonged to another branch of the family, likewise springing from Alexander II. Of all the Grand Dukes, Andrei and Dmitri are the ones who, by virtue of their intelligence, their character, and their political knowledge, exercise the greatest authority over their compatriots. It's important to establish those facts so that the weightiness of the statements that follow will be properly appreciated. Okay, so that's very basic stuff. It's true, except for this last paragraph. So he's talking about branches of the family. So Nicholas II, of course, would have become one. And with the four girls and with Alexei, assuming that they married and had offspring, and that Alexei lived long enough to do that, that had become the senior branch of the family. So the branch of the family that he's highlighting here, of course, is the Vladimirovichi, the children of Grand Duke Vladimir Alexandrovich, whom he doesn't mention by name, the four children, Kirill, Boris, Andrei, and Elena, Helen, and they all survived and were in exile. And as he says, Cyril had died in 1938, that very year, but the other three were still alive, and the daughter didn't really come into it, of course. She wasn't a candidate for the throne or a leader of the emigration. Okay, so who lived in Bellevue? I'm not sure. The way he puts that, it's a bit confusing. You don't know if he's referring to Andrei or Boris, or Andrei and Boris together, but I believe it was Boris, and I have no idea if he did or did not live in Bellevue. Fayard puts it in the past tense, so I don't know. I think he was primarily living in the south of France. The liberal tendencies of Kirill. Well, I think most of us, most of you viewing this know what happened, that Kirill, as soon as the revolution had gotten underway and Nicholas had abdicated, Kirill put a red ribbon on his jacket and took his men of the Guards naval equipage, likewise wearing red ribbons, and they marched to the Duma to show their allegiance to the new provisional government, and that was a scandal. And it was one of the main things after Kirill had made it out to France and declared himself the emperor in exile and the guardian of the throne. It was one of the main things that people considered as a disqualifier, and Dmitri also was very loud in 1921 in considering it an absolute disqualifier, although that was hypocritical on his part, because he also had reached out to the provisional government and offered to give his allegiance to the provisional government. He was in contact with the head of the provisional government, Alexander Kerensky, while he was in Persia. He was exchanging letters with him. He admired him. He talks about that in his diaries, and so even though he didn't make an outward show of that, he was, if Kirill had liberal tendencies, so did Dmitri, and was willing to support the provisional government. Not the Bolsheviks, make no mistake, but the provisional government, which was in charge at that time. Was there indeed complete accord when Kirill died and Vladimir replaced him as emperor in exile and guardian of the throne? I don't know. I doubt it. Has there ever been complete accord among the Russian emigration? There were so many different parts of it, but apparently he was more accepted on a broader scale than his father had ever been. So fair enough, I can believe that. The crown of Ukraine, we have Dmitri saying explicitly, yes, it was offered to him. Or rather, we have Fayard saying explicitly it was offered to him. The offer was made. He doesn't mention by name the fact that the offerer, so to speak, were the Nazis, the German Nazi government. But that's more or less what this interview is about. At least it's why Dmitri called the interview, to address that scandalous situation. Okay, I have in previous videos raised the question of whether the Vladimirovichi were not the brightest members of the imperial family. Personally, I see the smart, intellectual branch of the, if not intellectual, then very intelligent branch of the imperial family to be the Konstantinovichi and the descendants, which included Dmitri and Maria, of Grand Duke Konstantin Nikolaevich, who was a man I personally admire, very smart, very gifted, very open-minded, unlike other members of the of the family and passing that on to his children, and in Dmitri and Maria, I would say also to his other descendants. He was, I believe, their great-grandfather. He was their grandmother's father. So were the Vladimirovichi, in a word, stupid? Well, they were certainly ineffectual, I would say. I don't think they were, they weren't stupid, but relatively speaking, I don't think they were on the smart side of the spectrum necessarily, just sort of average. And Kirill was under the thumb of his wife. He had undoubtedly PTSD from having been the only survivor of the sinking of a ship during the Russo-Japanese War, and he never quite recovered from that. And yeah, he was just kind of, I think, ineffectual, and he was behaving stupidly in declaring himself the emperor in exile and giving out titles, which should only be the prerogative of a ruling monarch, a reigning monarch. And so, yeah, that doesn't speak well for him being a really thoughtful person, I would say. Thoughtful not in the sense of considerate, but of understanding things and giving things the necessary thought and consideration. Boris was just such a non-entity, whether he was stupid or not, I don't know, but he just wasn't interested, and that's fine. Andrei, I wouldn't say he was stupid. I guess I read his 1915 diaries, and I didn't think he came across as, I thought he came across as being, an intelligent man who saw what was going on around him. Of course, it's been a long time since I've read those. On the other hand, having read Kshesinska, his lover, and then his wife, her memoirs, I thought the presentation that she gives of the two of them is not flattering to Andrei. He just seems this kind of childish, frivolous person, and that's the impression that Dmitri gives of him as well, at least to me, when I read the diary entries that Dmitri wrote in 1921, and if you haven't watched those, I did the video series on the 1921 diary entries, so go and have a look at those. And, Andrei is kind of this weepy doormat of a guy, again, obviously under the thumb of his mistress and then wife, Kshesinska, and just doesn't seem like he's ever going to amount to much. So this is interesting. What Fayard is saying here, and it may be that Andrei was just in the shadow of his older brothers. He was not a youngest child, but a youngest son. And, maybe since Boris was so completely withdrawn, and since Cyril had now died, leaving a 21-year-old son, maybe Andrei, maybe he started rising to the occasion. I don't know. But I find it very interesting that Fayard says that Dmitri and Andrei, he puts them together, they are the ones among the surviving members of the imperial family who are intelligent, men of character, and have political knowledge. Well, Dmitri certainly had political knowledge. It had been a lifelong passion of his. He certainly was intelligent. The character depends on how you interpret things. I think I mentioned before that Fayard himself would, in 1941, write what appears to have been an essay called All My Mistresses, or Just My Mistresses. So I don't think that he would consider that sort of past of being a philanderer to be a strike against Dmitri's character. And Dmitri was a decent man, and he tried to do the right thing. I'm sure Andrei did as well. But anyway, those were how he describes these two men, and I think he probably had never met Andrei, so I think he's trying to present to his readers what the general consensus was of the members of the imperial family, and that was that Dmitri and Andrei were the ones to take seriously, and not Vladimir, who of course was 21. And it's not Andrei who's called for this interview, and called a kind of press conference with the other interview as well. It's not Andrei, it's Dmitri. And so Dmitri is really emerging at this moment in time as the serious one and as the head of the family, in action, if not in, being acknowledged as that. But, the emigration, according to Grunwald, the emigres are sort of turning to him, to Dmitri, but a lot of them with hostility because of Vladimir's hostility. They're seeing him as a threat. So all that is very interesting and relevant. Yeah, and in fact, Fayard even uses the word authority, that Andrei and Dmitri, by virtue of their intelligence, their character, and their political knowledge, exercise the greatest authority over their compatriots. So by their compatriots, he means other Russians in exile, other emigres. And so, again, this seems to point to the fact that Dmitri, much more so than Andrei, was important at that moment in time. And Grunwald said he had become more or less disinterested because he had moved on to greener pastures, so to speak, or was trying to, with heads of state in England and important people like the press baron Beaverbrook. But this was the time when the emigration, those who were not opposed to him and pro-German and even pro-Nazi, were looking to him for leadership. Okay, so along those lines, next time, 1939, Dmitri is going to talk about this offer by the Nazis, and he is going to make a declaration, a very resounding one, of his own patriotism and where he stands in relation to the Soviets and Russia and the Germans. And so it's an important statement. So do come back for that. When we return to 1915, we will have Dmitri's first day in Moscow. We will have actresses galore, and we will have Johnson. Nikolai, I think, was his first name. He was the son of an English father and a Russian mother, and he was attached to the service of Grand Duke Mikhail Alexandrovich, and he was not doing Grand Duke Michael any favors at that time, because he was helping Dmitri link up with the Grand Duke's wife, Countess Brasova. So I'll say goodbye until next time.